They haven't heard that. Oh, heard that. And good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the joint public meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Redevelopment Agency for December 14th, 2010. May we have roll call for the council, please?
Council members Draymond.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Najarian.
Here.
And we need a roll call for agency. Agency
Yes, ma'am.
members Draymond.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chair Friedman.
Here.
May we have your report?
The agenda for the December 14, 2010 joint public meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Redevelopment Agency was posted on Thursday, December 9, 2010 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. The item before you today is a public hearing. Director of Community Planning and Community Redevelopment and Housing regarding final approvals for the proposed Mita Plaza mixed-use development to be located at 435 West Los Feliz Road, including Stage 2 design and final entitlements. At 1A is agency resolution certifying the EIR, making findings related thereto, and adopting a statement of overriding considerations. 1B is council resolution certifying the EIR, making findings related thereto, and adopting a statement of overriding considerations. At 1C is an agenda motion, agency motion approving Stage 2 design subject to comments and conditions. At D is an agency motion approving sign program. At E is the agency motion approving 125 space parking exception. At F is council motion approving conditional use permit to allow a health spa with associated massage services in the IMUR zone. At G is council motion approving 5 conditional use permits for on-site and off-site sales, services, and consumption of alcoholic beverages. At H is council motion approving standards variance for the parking structure, height, and building corner treatment. At I is council motion approving 2 sign variances.
Thank you. Mr. Starbird.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair, I will go to Elena Babolian, Senior Administrative Analyst with the agency for the staff report. Elena?
And I will open the public hearing.
Good afternoon, members of the agency and City Council. We're here today seeking approval for the final design for the mixed-use project proposed for 435 Los Feliz Road. You last reviewed this project back in February at the conceptual stage and recommended approval for it to move to Stage 2. This project site is bound by Fernando Court to the north, Gardena Avenue to the east, Los Feliz Road to the south, and the railroad tracks to the west. This project includes 163,000 square feet of supermarket, retail, restaurants, health spa, medical, and general offices. As is typical with large projects, we are requesting approval of a number of entitlements today. The environmental review, design, and sign program are standard approvals associated with large commercial projects. The Stage 2 design is being conditioned upon the acquisition of the publicly owned embankment. The developer is also seeking additional approvals for parking, conditional use permit, and variances. Once I conclude, Tony Lacasciato from Impact Sciences will address the EIR and discuss the need for a statement of overriding considerations. After Tony, Chuck Lau, representing the developer, will present the Stage 2 design and how the design has evolved from the Stage 1 comments back in February. I'd like to touch briefly on the entitlements. A sign program is required for commercial projects with more than 2 tenants. The sign program presented for this project blends in with the building's architecture and will assure consistent signs for future tenants, and as such, approval of the sign program is recommended. Moving on to the conditional use permits, the developer is seeking conditional use permits for the health spa with massage services and for 4 restaurants and the spa to have the ability to serve alcohol once they're up and running. The supermarket does not require a conditional use permit as it's larger than 20,000 square feet. Conditions of approval drafted with the police department are included for your review and approval. The project is seeking a 125 space parking exception. A parking study was commissioned and found that given the different land uses and the varying hours of operation, that the shared parking can occur with the 597 parking spaces that are to be provided as part of the project. Traffic and parking consultant is available if you'd like to go into detail on the parking study. Moving on to the variances. The project is seeking 2 variances, one for the height of the parking structure exceeding the code allowed 6 stories, and for the corner treatment of Fernando and Gardena. The site is constrained by a storm drain running in the middle of the site, 2 sewer lines, the railroad tracks, and the publicly owned embankment. These encumbrances force the parking structure to increase in height as the footprint of the garage is severely impacted. An entrance at Fernando and Gardena is not provided due to the minimal number of pedestrians and the fact that there is a more prominent entrance provided at the corner of Los Feliz and Gardena Avenue. As a result, pedestrian activity will be encouraged at Gardena and Los Feliz. Lastly, the project is seeking 2 sign variances for the increase in size in the building identification sign, which is well integrated into the building's architecture, and the signs on the parking structure, as there are no occupancies in the parking structure. Findings to support both variances are included for your approval. That concludes my presentation at this time, and I'd like to introduce Chuck Lau to present the project design, who will be followed by Tony Locasciato from Impact Sciences to address the EIR.
Good afternoon, members of the City Council and members of the agency. Thank you for having us today, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to present to you the Stage 2 design and the final entitlement request for our project. We have today with us pretty much our entire entourage of professionals, consultants, and whatnot to answer any technical question that you may have on the design, on the EIR, or any other question that you might have. If you remember, the last time that you saw the project was back in February of this year in a public hearing with the agency for Stage 1. And at that particular meeting, the agency gave us some very positive feedback and also some specific directions as to how to proceed with our project. And since that time, we've been working diligently with staff, very closely with them to further refine the project, and I believe we have achieved our goals and achieve what we believe now it's the final phase of the project. But first, before I get into that, I would just like to maybe just take a minute to share with you and the overall concept and also the vision from Dr. Cho for this project. Back when Dr. Cho first acquired the property, back just a few years ago, the site was developed with several smaller, here we go, that slide, smaller industrial buildings that were basically dilapidated in a state of blight. The property was obviously underutilized, and the old buildings were well past their economic life. Dr. Cho recognized that Los Feliz Road, it's an important gateway both to and from the city of Glendale. I can remember that back when I was attending high school that I went to John Marshall High School, and every time I came into Glendale, Los Feliz was really the, I guess, path of choice, if you will. And so it does have a fair amount of traffic volume on that street. And he recognized that this is an important gateway to the city. And he thought that this would be a perfect opportunity to create a unique and special project that would create not only short-term construction-type jobs to the area, but also long-term permanent jobs that would benefit just about everybody across the board. Dr. Cho, it's also a very prominent member in the community, and he is well aware of the fact that there is a large contingent of Asian, Korean population that resides in the Glendale, city of Glendale, as well as a lot of the adjoining cities, such as La Crescenta, La Cañada, Burbank, Pasadena, and even as far as Simi Valley. And as such, a lot of the people that live in these areas, currently they have to commute a lot of times all the way to L.A., basically to Koreatown, to do a lot of their shopping, just to buy some of the grocery items that they need and to also shop and buy other retail items. Dr. Cho's vision is to put in a Korean supermarket at this location, as well as other retail, office, and medical uses at the same location. And the concept is that the people in these surrounding areas that I had just talked about can now come directly to this particular location because, frankly, there is nothing like it in the surrounding area. And so rather than commuting all the way to L.A., now they have a destination, if you will, that they can come to. And also vice versa. There's a lot of people that are in the L.A., Koreatown area that also, believe it or not, shop and buy their items at Costco, which is our neighbor to the north, I believe. Yes. And no, that would be to the west, I'm sorry. And a lot of business owners, they come by and they buy large bulk items, if you will. If you've ever been to Costco, they buy, 100 rolls of paper towel and whatnot, basically for their thing, and also other household items as well. And by having this particular mixed-use building location, now they also have another destination that they can come and shop and spend some of their money in this shopping center as well. And with that vision and with a lot of determination, Dr. Cho proceeded with this project, and after many, many months of diligent work and effort, we are now finally here today in front of the City Council, in front of the agency, for our final entitlement request. And today's meeting, it's another big step forward, a milestone, if you will, that will bring Dr. Cho just one step closer to realizing his dreams. And with that, I'd like to just maybe quickly go over some of the slides. This is basically an overall site plan that shows the relationship of our parking structure that's to the left or to the west. And obviously to the east, it's our 5-story multi-mixed-use building. And primarily, as the staff has mentioned, there are a number of constraints, if you will, that exist on this property. One, obviously, being that there is a easement that bifurcates the property, and so we had to separate the two buildings. And let's go to the next slide. This is just a conceptual rendering of what the project would look like after it is completed. It is a very colorful building. The architecture, it's decidedly contemporary. It is a very bold and vibrant building. We've been working very diligently with staff to refine a lot of the elements, including the landscaping, including the elevator shafts, including the embankment, and so on and so forth. Next slide. This is a shot of what it looks like now in a before and after picture of the actual embankment. Currently, the embankment is just a large cascade of concrete. Not a whole lot to look at. It's a very harsh, very brutal, if you will, fixture. And upon approval of this project, we would proceed diligently to acquire that right away from the city and incorporate our project into it. And as you can see, a lot of the landscape, hardscape feature that has a much more fluid and much more flowing design would be incorporated. The landscaping would consist of a lot of vibrant colors. There's also a water feature and lots of landscaping, and a lot of these landscaping are also of the low water consumption variety as well. Next slide, please. This is also another before and after shot of that same embankment, but looking in a westerly direction as you're traveling on a westbound from Los Feliz. And this is basically the corner, the main entrance of the building, the pedestrian entrance, if you will. And it shows, again, the embankment treatment with the palm trees, with the landscaping, and with the colors, and also with things that are somewhat in a more pedestrian scale. Next slide, please. This is a section drawing that basically illustrates the relationship between the parking structure and the mixed-use building. The parking structure, it's 2 stories or 2-level subterranean underground, and the other 7-level, it's above ground. And the mixed-use building contains a basement level as well as 5 stories above ground. The lower basement level, that's where our supermarket will be. At the ground level and second level, that'll be where the retail, the spas, and also the restaurants uses will be. And then the 4th level will be general offices. And then on the top and final 4th level, that will be, I believe, the medical and also perhaps additional professional office. And the 2 structures are, although they are technically separate buildings, they are interconnected. There is a trellis element on top that spans over the 2 buildings, as well as several pedestrian bridges that connects the 2 buildings together for access purpose. Next slide, please. This is an additional rendering of The one on the left-hand side, that is an interior atrium shot of the actual retail restaurant area. And there you can see there's an open atrium area with a network of escalators, if you will, that you can access from one floor to the next. And the slide on your right-hand side, that is an actual rendering of the area that's right between the parking structure and the mixed-use building. Again, it shows where the trellis element is, as well as there's some of those pedestrian bridgeways in the background, as well as some additional landscaping and trees to soften up that area and also to give it a little bit more human, a little bit more pedestrian scale. Next slide, please. This is a night shot that we've taken. And as you can imagine, since the building, there's a lot of glazing on this building. And I can imagine that it would be a very striking-looking building, particularly at nighttime. And we do have our lighting consultant on board. Our lighting engineer will study this in greater detail, and not just the exterior sconces and pathway and other lightings, but also a lot of the interior lighting as well. And I also want to just mention that I believe that at the very get-go of this building, that one of the things we wanted to do was to make sure that this was a sustainable project. So a lot of the features that we're going to be incorporating, obviously, would be that we will use solar panels to harness as much energy from the sun as possible, because there's some large expanse of roof area that would just, go to waste if you don't. We would also be using a lot of water conservation faucets. We would be using low water usage toilets, as well as waterless urinals, at least in the men's rooms. And other than that, for the most part, that will do it for my presentation. Again, we have our consultants here today, both our environmental consultant as well as our traffic and landscape and all that. So if you have any question, I will probably defer it until after our environmental consultant goes over his items. So unless you have any other question, I will bring up my colleague.
Okay, let's bring him up. We'll have questions at the end of the presentation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We have another ER for you this afternoon that assesses 9 topics. Again, a brief summary of the impacts for you, focusing on the ones that could not be mitigated. Again, the ER you have before you finds the majority of the topics and potential impacts are either less than significant or can be mitigated to a less than significant level. Less than significant impacts include the aesthetic and visual character changes that would result from this project, the air quality analysis, including analysis of increase in greenhouse gases, shows those impacts will quantitatively not be significant from operation of this project. Land use and planning, the project's been found to be consistent with the city's general plan and applicable policies. Certain aspects of the noise analysis, including the contribution of noise from the increase in trips associated with this project on streets in the area, is not significant, and the interior and exterior noise levels around the project will not be significant. Of course, we have a major rail line right next to this project, but the placement of the parking structure also makes it a noise barrier and vibration barrier that mitigates potential impacts you would anticipate from locating any facility this close to a major rail line. Utilities and service systems were also examined, and potential water and sewer impacts are not significant. Again, we have a few impacts that are potentially significant, but for which mitigation measures have been identified. During air quality, there are some emissions possible during construction that are particularly associated with applying architectural coatings and paints. Some standard air district mitigation measures mitigates that potential impact to less than significant. As was mentioned, the project contains some existing structures and buildings used for industrial purposes. Based on their age, it's anticipated they'll contain some materials that may contain asbestos, lead paint, PCBs, all of which those potential hazards can be mitigated by following standard practices during the demolition of those buildings. Public services, again, you have fees in place to mitigate potential impacts to fire, emergency medical, and police services. The same with impacts to the city sewer collection services. Now we go on to the unavoidable significant impacts for this project. Related to noise, the threshold we use in the analysis, an increase of 3 decibels or less, you probably won't notice it. You get above 5 decibels, you'll notice it. So we use that as our significance threshold. Fernando Court, which right now is a pretty quiet industrial street, that'll have an increase, a big increase in traffic. Normally you have to have the traffic go up by a factor of 2 to get much of an increase in noise. You'll have a lot more than that. So the increase will be above 5 decibels, we note that. The overall noise level will be less than the city's acceptable standard for an industrial area, but nonetheless that's noted since it is above the 5 decibel threshold as an unavoidable impact of this project for those streets right there that serve the project. And during construction, there'll be periods where noise will be above 70 decibels, which is the city's desired noise level, even in an industrial area. Temporary impact. Utilities and service system, again, the county keeps wanting to remind everybody landfills do fill up, and every project chips in a little. Parks and recreation, again, as you're aware, you have a fee, you have some tax increments set aside. It doesn't fully mitigate impacts, and that's noted, even though a project like this will have very little demand and impact on park and rec facilities. The biggest technical study in the CIR relates to traffic. As was mentioned, the project is expected to have more than just local traffic draw. So it's a big traffic study. It looks at 18 intersections, including 4 in the city of Los Angeles that the city requested the city of Glendale look at. There are no impacts to those 4 intersections in the city of Los Angeles. The project will impact 6 of the intersection study. Mitigation measures, improvements have been identified to mitigate the impacts fully at 2 of those intersections. There are 4 intersections where the impact can't be fully mitigated due to right-of-way constraints or the fact you'd have to remove a lot of parking, which in and of itself would have its own impact. Just wanted to note the threshold the city uses is basically the total capacity of the intersection. If a project is using up more than 2% of that capacity, at the level of service of most of these intersections, that's a significant impact. So in this case, a project is adding between 2 and 4, up to 10% at one of the intersections during the PM peak hour. There are some improvements identified, everything feasible, can't quite pull those numbers all the way down. So they're minor impacts, but they are above the threshold. They can't be mitigated, and that's the reason they're identified as unavoidable and significant. When we look at cumulative effects and add in traffic from other related projects in the area, there are 9 intersections analyzed. 9 of the 18 we analyzed will have a significant cumulative impact. One of those intersections can be fully mitigated, the other 8 cannot. So the unavoidable traffic impacts occur at 4 intersections with the project traffic, and with cumulative traffic from related projects at 8 intersections in the area. Again, all those in Glendale, none of the intersections in the city of Los Angeles. I know the consulting traffic engineers here and can go into more detail on that if you want. And that's an overview of the findings of the CIR for you.
You. Next up? Is there a next step? There was a request for Alan Loomis to come forward, our senior urban designer, to give his comments on this project and answer any questions that may stem from those comments.
Yep.
So, what do you think? I'll give you an open-ended
Pretty open-ended question. As we noted in the design evaluation that I prepared as part of the packet and the staff report, we are recommending approval on this project with a few minor conditions. At this point, the design has advanced considerably, I would say, since the Stage 1 review you saw in February. A major component of that was a primary concern of ours and mine, other staff, was the detailing and condition of the embankment. That is going to be the gateway to Glendale. The sort of first thing that people driving into the city or leaving the city on Los Feliz Road would see, and it was very important that all the various elements, whether it was landscape signs, the garage entry, the glass and glazing and color pattern on the building itself, that actually all be coordinated. When we saw the project in February, it was still a little bit jumbled, and I think we've arrived at a pretty comfortable resolution of those various elements. So at this point, I think that's kind of the primary concern, is that Los Feliz frontage and that gateway. So it's much beyond where it was before, and that's why we're recommending approval. We'll note that we are recommending a few minor conditions that we would like to request that the agency and council allow us to follow up administratively at a staff level with the applicant. These are somewhat consistent with the kind of conditions that the Design Review Board would put onto projects when they approve with conditions. There's minor issues about sort of specifying some of the materials that are left out of the packet. There's a lot of information in here. There's a few things that we think we're still a little uncertain about, but we think we can resolve that with the applicant administratively as they move forward into the next phase of design. So I hope that answered the question.
Follow-up question? Not
for him.
Not for him. Okay. Can you address the, Mr. Mitchell, parking?
I think that'd probably be best directed to Mr. Mitchell or somebody else from the Traffic Engineering Division.
Are there any other questions? Any questions of Mr. Loomis? Mr. Mitchell, or anyone who can address the parking.
Okay.
If I can introduce Carl Ballard, he's with Koonsman Associates. They prepared both the traffic study and the parking study.
So my question to you, sir, is going to be, this project is requesting a 125-space parking exception. Why do you think that the current level of parking that you have is sufficient?
We did a pretty comprehensive shared parking analysis, and we looked at the mix of uses, the office, the medical office, supermarket, and the retail components. And we looked at the peaks and valleys throughout the day and did a shared parking analysis using ULI, Urban Land Institute procedures, and showed that the 597 parking spaces would be adequate for this site just because of the mix of uses. It was a pretty comprehensive study. We actually looked at other off-site uses throughout the day in December, which would be the peak month with retail, and showed that for a weekday and a weekend that 597 parking spaces would be adequate for the site.
Anyone else have any questions?
I have a question. It's about the traffic, the increased traffic situation. When we just did our bicycle and pedestrian survey in Glendale, it showed for the second year in a row that Los Feliz, not surprisingly, is a major route for bicycle commuters. And I'm wondering if part of their traffic mitigation, if there's been any thought to how we can make this, given the increased traffic, safer for the bicycle commuters.
We worked with the city traffic engineer pretty comprehensively on the bikeway plan. There's 2 lanes going westbound along Los Feliz. One lane, the number 1 lane, the inner lane, would be probably 10 to 11 feet wide. The outer lane would be it would be wide enough to provide 5 feet against the curb for bikes traveling westbound. Now, granted, that will not be striped separately, but it's wide enough to provide a second through lane, 5 feet for the bikes, and then the project's going to actually widen and provide a 10-foot right turn lane turning into the site. Tom Mitchell in the Traffic Engineering Division was heavily involved in that discussion, and he approved the direction that the project's going with the bikeways.
Okay.
I have a follow-up on that, and then I'll go to Mr. Quintero. There's not a lot of street parking in the neighborhood. One of the concerns that we have, and one of the things that we've observed whenever a new project comes in that has a significant employment base, is that a lot of the workers, rather than pay for parking, either on a daily or monthly basis, will scout out spots in the neighborhood and fill up the neighborhood, and we get a lot of complaints from that. Is there a plan as to how to deal with that, even though there are technically sufficient number of spaces, a choice for a minimum wage worker to either park and spend $5, $10 a day or maybe more versus scout out some spots in the neighborhood for free creates some conflict? Is there any thought, have you thought about how that could be either managed or mitigated?
The parking study just dealt with the existing parking on the street. I didn't really work with how, the workers' wages and everything's included in the parking study. I don't know if somebody else from the project team could handle that.
Mr. Starbird, maybe you
Well,
can...
it might be useful to ask, how many employees will there likely be? I presume the largest number would be during the day. Do you know for the facility how many employees there will be?
We dealt with, on our parking study, we used the square footages for all the different components, and we didn't actually convert it over to employees in the parking study.
Is there anyone who can address that? Because, it's not a new issue. We face it whenever there's a new development that comes.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we're looking at the environmental document to identify the number that the study was based on. We'll have that answer for you momentarily.
Yes, let me go back then to Chair Friedman and then Mr. Quintero for any other questions of any other person, as well as opening up to my colleagues.
While they're looking for that information, I'm curious as to whether you evaluated or whether the developers evaluated any of the automated parking systems that are out on the market now?
We just looked at the gates, how the gates would work. We didn't look at anything else. We felt that would be, analyzed later when the parking structure moves forward. I don't know if anybody else from the project team...
By automated parking, I mean the systems that actually park the cars so the people never go into the garages, and they typically use about half the space of a conventional garage.
I'm aware of the system, but we did not look into it on our end of the parking or traffic study. Sorry about that.
Okay,
I
Mr.
have some
Quintero.
questions about the structure itself. First of all, are there going to be signs that give the shoppers an idea of how many spaces are available on the first floor, second floor, third floor? That seems to be...
We would recommend that they would do that. Of course, we probably should talk to the architect or the garage.
Okay, that's not a requirement at this point. Okay, then in terms of the structure itself, is it a situation where people pulling into the structure at whatever floor they are, do they have to wait until someone pulls out and so forth? How narrow, I guess, are the individual lanes? Like, for instance, at our Glendale Galleria, the lanes are so hopelessly narrow that literally everything is at a standstill until the person pulls out and moves on. Is this the same type of situation?
With the design of the parking structure, Tom Mitchell worked with the garage consultant, and I was not involved in those conversations. He was mostly concerned about how to make it so that when you enter, there's no queuing onto the public street at the gate location, and then coming out with people coming down the ramp versus coming out of parking space, how that would work. And I'm sure they had that discussion. I was not involved in that discussion, though.
And finally, I'm not quite clear, the parking is free or not?
Mr. Tatavosian.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the initial question was number of employees. Approximately 209. The environmental analysis was 209, but they're not there all at the same time, given that this is a retail and there are employees in shift. I understand from the developer that the employees will not be charged to park on site. However, customer parking is a question that I don't believe the environmental document is evaluated at this point. If I could look back to Tony. But the employee parking is assumed not to be charged at this point.
Starbird?
Just to point out that I think this becomes a sensitive issue given this neighborhood. In many settings, if employees decide to park on the street, it may not be terribly problematic. In this setting, there is no excess street parking. We learned that by other issues that have occurred in the neighborhood, and by the EAR, it noted that 42 daily cars were parking on this site. So you may want to consider attaching as a condition to this development that employees indeed be allowed to park in the structure at no charge. Otherwise, what we find is if there's any charge, employees tend to go out on the streets, and there is no room on the streets in this neighborhood.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Draymond.
I thank you for that comment, Mr. City Manager, because that is a concern. In fact, what we've seen throughout the city, not just in this neighborhood, is projects where the city will require on-site parking for employees. We routinely do that, or require on-site parking. But then once the project gets rolling, the employees are encouraged to go park elsewhere, so there is a way to meet the demand of the customer base arriving at the site. And then we're off to the races with heavy-duty impacts. So that is a concern to me, and I would like to see that kind of a condition be placed. That they provide, that they be compelled to provide on-site parking for employees, and that there be no charge. Then, secondly, about the parking. What about the spillover? Do we anticipate what we'll do if or when that occurs? In other words, you have immediately next to this site, just as an example, there's a small veterinary hospital. Can't remember the name of it, but there is one right on the corner of Gardena. Gateway, thank you. Somewhat familiar with that site. A lot of their parking occurs on Gardena, just on the corner off of Los Feliz. I have a feeling that all of that parking is going to go away when this project is operating. Have we looked at that? Have we thought about that? And not just with regard to Gateway, but with regard to other businesses. Residential is yet another issue, but with regard to businesses. Is somebody that can answer that? And I understand what the EIR is saying. Right. I want to know in a real live situational, not in a theoretical way. Have we actually looked at that?
Members of the council, besides what the environmental document evaluated, we know specifically that the Gateway Animal Hospital is actually in the process of reshuffling some buildings on site to provide additional parking, both for their employees and for their patients. Or patients' owners, I should say, client owners, not the patients. They don't drive. Yeah, the patients don't drive.
I doubt their patients are driving in by themselves.
Right.
So.
However, in terms of, there are several businesses that currently don't have parking on site, and part of the environmental document did look at those businesses and the reality that many of them use the subject site to meet their parking demand. That is part of the reason why we have an environmental impact with this project associated with the removal of parking. But the burden is back on the businesses, and we have discussed it internally in terms of how should there be a parking shortage associated by visitors to the subject project, that we would have to revisit the street parking situation. Currently, there are no residents in proximity that use the side streets for parking. They're all industrial. Many of them are dark after a certain hour, 4, 3 o'clock, when the evening parking demand goes up. And we've also looked at opportunities that should there be available parking on site if the developer would be interested in opening those parking spaces to adjacent businesses. But, there is no requirement at the moment for that.
And so far, in those discussions, what is the tenor of those discussions as to the likelihood that would happen?
We haven't really concluded that, and I think the developer is here should he feel obligated to answer that question. At this point, we don't have a conclusion on that.
All right. And my last question for now, Mr. Mayor, I don't think Mr. Tadevosian can actually answer. He probably could answer, but I'd like to get an answer from someone connected to the project. If they could tell us about the spa itself and what kind of a spa is that? In other words, is it talking about a traditional kind of gym or something else?
Dear Honor Mayor and then every distinguished councilman, it's very honor for me to hear to answer the question. But yes, actually, spa. Be honest with you. We are negotiating couple of spa candidates, but we are not sure they will come in or not, because the challenge is they are asking very low rental rate. And then I talked with my in-house construction team. The cost of construction a little bit high, but in the stage of kind of battling with the spa tenant, so I cannot answer they will come in or not at this stage as a business point of view. So that actually third place we planned the spa, but we are thinking maybe fourth medical office, medical doctors coming in, so the floor maybe half will be filled with the related business like pharmacy, physical therapy, equipment, optometry, and then I thought about some learning center like SAT or music for the children's education center that we are thinking about spa or that kind of educational center maybe feeling more sense now, like SAT, some preparation or music for the. I found because of as our teams explained to you, this site is maybe initially I found maybe big demand for the Korean American shopping mall, Korean market, and then of course 60-70%, 30-40% non-Korean some business, but third floor maybe educational. There's a huge dense crowded Korean American. They are very interested in the education fever. Actually, they are very parents are very motivated, making the children going good to school. So I think that's another very good option. We are discussing with a spa or educational center, third floor, maybe 10 or 15,000, 20,000 square foot. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Dr. Cho.
Thank you very much.
So then, Mr. Mayor, as a follow-up that I didn't anticipate, maybe I do need you, Mr. Tadafos, in just a question. So are we saying that we're not clear that we will have a spa here, and if we are in that space, and if we are, we don't know what kind of spa? And the reason I ask is because when we're talking about traffic and other things, a spa that is a gym, for example, that kind of a thing, is a very different use and very different impact in my mind than a children's educational center where parents are driving in, dropping off kids, and leaving. So
the spa that
we're actually talking about here, then,
members of the council, the spa that's been evaluated by in terms of zoning and also in terms of the environmental document is probably very similar to what you find in regular spas and also in typical Korean mall spas, where there's an associated there's a massage service associated with the spa. What is different with this is that they're also seeking a CUP for the alcohol service at the spa. Based on the floor plans that they have shared with the staff, that's what the environmental document was based on. That is our understanding.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, also based on this, what the applicant just said, the scenario, the hypothetical scenario that was just outlined, that if in fact the business terms for the spa do not materialize and they would like to change the use to some other set of uses, I must say that the environmental document has been prepared right now based on the assumption that that use would be a spa. If such a change of use is ever presented, we will have to reevaluate the application and make sure that the environmental document is sufficiently addressing those changes of use. It may be that we discovered that the parking situation and the traffic situation would be different, and a follow-up environmental work will be required. So at this point, while the applicant said that the business terms could change, we can tell you that from your staff's perspective, if those business terms change, we might require additional review by you or by some other authority in the city as necessary.
last question.
One other item. In the parking study, we did look at two similar spas at that point in time that the applicant felt was similar. One of them was the Diamond Family Spa in Roland Heights, and the other one was the beach spa in Buena Park. So we looked at those two for their parking at peak periods.
All right. My concern, though, relates to the fact that what I'm hearing from the owner is that based on the economics and the rental rates, that we haven't really identified anybody right now, and that it may well be used for some other purpose. We're saying that from the jump here today. So I just want to be clear on that so I understand what it is I'm potentially voting for in a very confined neighborhood. Anyway, last question. Somebody just tell me what the hours of the market are intended to be. Or anticipated to be.
And please state your name, sir, so we have it for the record.
Yes, my name is David Kang. I work for MITA as a financial advisor and project manager as well. The hours of the market should be, similar to that of Ralph's supermarket. The hours in the morning to midnight time.
Thank you very much.
Chair Friedman.
I have some questions. First, for staff. Have we had any communication from LA City Council or from the Atwater Town Council about this project?
Councilmember Friedman, we did during the draft environmental impact report back in the spring. Since then, for preparation for today's hearing, the same folks were notified, and I have not yet heard from anybody, and I don't see anybody from Atwater. Their main concerns were traffic at the time they brought it up back during stage 1 and the draft environmental impact report.
Will this project be paying the arts fee? Do they fall under that new ordinance?
Yes, they do, and under the fiscal impacts, it's noted as one of the fees that the developer will have to pay.
Now, I think I heard from the developer, and I want to just be sure about that they're planning on offering 3 hours free parking?
I can ask for him to verify that.
Yes, probably in detail we are trying to make the rules, but at this time market common practice, every shopping mall 3 hours, and then we're discussing about maybe medical doctor's office, other doctor's office, they charge it, so for the patients, something like that. So in detail, we haven't made a decision yet. Yeah, market, major retail, 3 hour parking lot is other common shopping mall practice.
Okay.
As well as I can answer about spa or educational center. Probably we will go more the educational center. That's better for everybody. For the because that a little bit last this happened several months. So the owners, I will go this one educational center. It's clear. My answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Because to my mind, the concerns that Mr. Draymond brought up in terms of parking spilling into the neighborhoods or into the adjacent streets would be a lot less of a concern if we knew that there was a certain number of hours of free parking, because the customers would have a lot less incentive to go and park other places if the parking was free. So I don't know if we have the ability to make a requirement as part of this that there be a certain amount of free parking or a certain number of hours of free parking, because that would make me feel a lot more comfortable about this not having an impact on the streets surrounding it. That's something that we are able to do?
Members of the City Council, Councilmember Friedman, yes, you can condition the project, although you may want to receive additional input from the developer and the traffic consultant concerning the possible project impacts economically and otherwise. But that is certainly within the purview of the City Council and the agency in reviewing the project. You have a parking exception in front of you. You have design review in front of you. Appropriate to add those types of conditions.
And can we require that employees park on site so that we talked about giving them free parking so that they would have a reason to park on site, but if for some reason they chose not to or they were starting to spill out, could we make it a requirement that they had to park on the site?
Yes, you can. In fact, we have drafted a condition that we, in response to the concerns that were previously mentioned, and that would be a condition that would be placed both in the parking exception approval and within the design review approval.
I'll have comments, but those are my only questions.
Mr. Starbird.
Maybe why Jillian has her microphone on. If it's unsettled as to some of the uses, take the spa, 25,000 square feet, I assume there's a big difference in parking demand for a 25 square foot educational facility as opposed to spa. So the various entitlements proposed to be granted here today relate to these specific uses, and yet, as the gentleman indicates, they're rather uncertain about one of the major components. How does that work, and what are the implications if the recommended entitlements are granted, including a parking exception, and then sometime before this building is built, they decide that some different use is more economical?
Well, I wish you better luck than I had in asking that exact same question, Mr. Starbird.
So how do we do this at this time on this EIR when the owners indicated that the uses are still in a state of flux?
The EIR identified a project description, and that's the description that was analyzed with the uses that you see in front of you today, which include the spa use. Normally, under CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, you do not have to identify specific tenants, but you do need to identify what those uses are and what their potential impacts would be. You can move forward with approval of the project with the uses as proposed, and should the property owner be unsuccessful in negotiating a favorable lease, as we have done with other projects before, what we can do is take a look at the implications for an alternative use for that space and analyze it. If it's a minor technical change without any worsening any previously identified significant impacts or creating any new significant impacts, we can do what's called an addendum to the EIR. That doesn't require additional public review. However, if there are effects from that new alternative use that do worsen previously identified significant impacts or create new impacts, then we're looking at a document that would require additional analysis and circulation. It would be brought back for additional review. And I see Mr. Hagani standing at the podium because there would also be, besides CEQA, additional review of the other entitlements, meaning that a design review may be impacted or some of the other entitlements may be impacted, and those would return to you for additional consideration. So I think that you can move forward legally with the EIR that you have and the entitlement package that is in front of you. And should there be, as I indicated, a change that creates those significant effects, we can handle it at a future point in time.
If I may add, what I think we can say publicly right now to the applicant, that just because the business terms change, that does not mean that the entitlements, that if the City Council and the agency were inclined to give the entitlements today, that those entitlements would also apply to any future business terms that he might work for. This would essentially be a theoretical change of use in an existing building. It happens that the building would be approved for a number of uses based on the environmental report that has been prepared for those uses. If for any reason one of those uses does not inaugurate in the building as planned in the EIR, then we would treat it like as if the building exists and they're applying to change the use. I can tell you that some of the educational uses that were mentioned today could be potentially a more intense use than the spa, which would require additional parking. Perhaps the traffic impacts would be less, but the parking impacts would be higher. In that sense, we would have to take a look and see how the issue of the parking impacts would be addressed by the applicant. They may or may not be able to address it on site. If they don't, then we would have to require another discretionary review. And whether it would be coming back to the City Council or to a hearing officer, that would be the process we would follow. And a new zoning use certificate would have to be issued for that particular section of the development, etc. And this is not uncommon that we have a building approved for multiple tenants at some point, and by the time the building gets approved, a different tenant is proposed. We then have to evaluate the use that's being proposed against the use that was approved.
Mr. Starbird.
And Hassan, while you're up there, and how do we distinguish between a spa and a 24-hour fitness? type operation. I'm not sure what you call that as opposed to a spa. I guess it's a exercise fitness facility as opposed to a spa.
I'm going to refer, because our Jeff Hamilton did the analysis for the planning perspective. I can tell you that we will look at the parking ratios. Jeff, could you tell me what the parking ratio for the health spa was?
I understand how we might make a distinction, but let's say it makes sense to put more exercise machines in than lounges in this facility, and it slowly begins to look more like a fitness exercise facility and less like a spa. And how do we control that?
Does our zoning code? See, our zoning code does not make a distinction between a 24-hour fitness and the kind of health spa in the
Maybe
Korean.
it's a question for the gentleman who did the
Right.
parking study. How did he distinguish? I see he went far afield to find spas that were comparable. We have a fitness facility here in Glendale that we know the direct results of it, but that's not what's proposed to be here.
That's right. And I can tell you, even in the 24-hour fitness perspective, the health, the educational institutions to us are more intense uses. Could you explain how you did the analysis?
We went out, or the existing spas that I described earlier, Roland Heights and Buena Park, they were actually surveyed, and so it does fit the description of a spa, and I would think that a separate study would have to be done if it switches over to something like a 24-hour fitness, because it's definitely different. It has different peaks and, throughout the day. So we did the parking study for a spa at this point.
Mr. Quintero, then maybe some public input?
I have a question for Hassan. Perhaps he can answer it. How would you go about policing employee parking? I'm just afraid that over time it begins to morph and somehow the employees are encouraged to...
Well, that's a good question. I believe if you were to consider adding a condition that the employees would be required to park on site, and for example, if you were inclined to add a condition that up to X number of hours of free parking will be provided, the only way that staff could check on that is by occasional sending of code enforcement, and if there is a complaint that we investigate. So usually that kind of condition comes into play when we have a code enforcement issue in play. Otherwise, the random checking from time to time is our only other alternative.
If I can add, the other approach you may likely get to is a potential for permit parking like we do in residential zones, where businesses may be able to park on the street with so many permits. That would probably be the only practical way of trying to limit either customer or employee parking if you got to the point that you found they were going into the commercial neighborhood. That's probably the only practical way of really controlling it, is through permits for the businesses that are there.
Mr. Draymond.
The reason that my concern relates more to the free parking for the employees is because it seems to me the primary draw on this site is going to be the market. I don't think by choice people shopping in the market are going to go park a block down the street when they have groceries to put in their car. The only thing that's going to cause them to do that is if they can't park on the site. The thing that's going to keep them from parking on the site is, and we see how these things, I see how these things happen long before coming to the council. I used to see it in Montrose, and I see it in other parts of the city. And that is that a site becomes successful, the businesses, the business enterprise on the site becomes successful, and there is a need for more parking on site. Why? You have a market. People need to be proximal to the front door in order to put their groceries in their cars. So what happens is, usually, the property owner, the landlord, sends out the instruction that we want the employees off the site. And whether it's legal, not legal, or the intention of the city or not the intention of the city, that's what happens. They're the ones that end up then out in the community. Take the small Trader Joe's site up on Foothill and New York Avenue. The intention is not for the employees to be parking somewhere else, but that's what happens. Because the goal is to get the shoppers in a convenient parking place, in other words, on site. Something's got to give, and that's where the employees end up being told, go park out in the neighborhood. So that's my concern. I don't know how we can make sure that happens. That's been a big pet peeve of mine coming to this council, is that we mandate a certain amount of parking on the site, but we have no way of making sure that it's used for that reason. And that is a concern of mine. We have never successfully dealt with that, in my view. It is an impact to the community, but it's one I'm going to take into account after I listen to the public and we move forward. But I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Let's hear from the public. We have Warner Lemenage, John Poindexter. Warner.
My name is Warner Lemenage, and I'm here to just find out the determination for the sign program and the variance. So until I hear that, I won't have a comment.
Could you repeat that, sir?
I'm here to hear about the determination for the sign program and the variance for the signs, and I don't have a comment until I hear that.
Okay, you need more about the signs. Okay. Do you have an opinion, though, about those? I mean, we haven't heard.
I'm definitely in favor of it.
I'm sorry?
I'm in favor of it.
You're in favor of the sign?
Of the signs, yes. Sign program and the variance, yes.
Okay. Thank you. John Poindexter.
Good afternoon, members of the council and agency, mayor. My name is John Poindexter. I appreciate the opportunity to address the council and the agency regarding the issues on this project. I note that I have submitted comments in response to project scoping and on the draft project EIR. Responses to my comments were included in the final EIR for the project. Consistently, I have expressed a concern about the configuration of the driveway onto the project from Los Feliz Road. I have asserted that that particular configuration was a potential hazard and asked that that be investigated in the final EIR. By the way, thank you, Councilmember Friedman, for asking the question regarding pedestrian and cyclist safety. That is a very significant concern of mine. Ultimately, I after reviewing the response to comments, I still have concerns, I still have questions. I wasn't able to meet with staff to get answers to all of my questions, and ultimately I will have to defer to the conclusions and expertise of the city staff, and you will have to rely upon the conclusions and expertise of city staff, with one major exception that I have to point out. In response to the comments, the final EIR indicated that that driveway would have a 90-degree intersection with Los Feliz Road. This is on page 3-11 in the responses to comments. The project plans which we were presented with today do not indicate a 90-degree intersection. As a matter of fact, it still continues to show a wide sweeping curve which encourages vehicles to enter the site at a high speed instead of the 15 miles per hour which the response to comments indicates. Given that, I would suggest that you consider in approving the project that you include either a mitigation measure or a condition of approval that requires that the driveway on Los Feliz Road be intersects Los Feliz Road at 90 degrees, and that it have an ordinary curb cut and driveway ramp as opposed to the high-speed configuration which is indicated on the project plans. I think that that is important. That will encourage traffic to slow down as an intersection, and although it will not completely avoid possible vehicle and pedestrian or cyclist interaction, it will certainly slower the speed as the traffic enters the site. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Molnar.
Good afternoon, members of the council and mayor. My name is Michael Molnar, and I'm a resident of Glendale, and I'm also a real estate professional. And my interest in this project is mainly based on the medical use part of it. My son just had his tonsillitis removed, and outpatient facilities are kind of rare in Glendale. And if I had to go to the hospital and they have the surgery done, the room service would have been like $1,600. While I was able to go to an outpatient service facility, it was only like $600 for the room charge, which will afford the residents of Glendale this kind of service and ability to service their children and their spouses and so forth and so on. So in that respect, I think the board should look favorable to approve this project. I know there are a lot of questions raised about parking and so forth and so on, but I'm sure there are solutions for any of those problems that would pop up to monitor and the use and so forth. And I strongly approve the project if it's possible. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Dr. So?
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and council members and ladies and gentlemen. I am a newly elected council member of the Crescent Valley Town Council. It is my honor and privilege to be here to express my concerns and support for this shopping center project proposed by Dr. Cho and his company. Dr. Cho has a good reputation and respect, not only as an individual but also as a real estate investor. I strongly believe this project will benefit not only the city of Glendale but also Korean community in this area. Your cooperation and help for this for approval of this project would be deeply appreciated by our Korean community in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Cho, do you have a card? Is there anything else that you would like to add?
I think many behind the background, my psychology has been explained a long time already, more than 2 years now. So, dear Honor, Councilman and the Mayor together, actually my vision about this mall, I thought about usually Korean American maybe 60, 70, as I said before. They come usually use this facility weekend. Usually market, they come maybe weekend more. The doctor's office usually in the morning. Like they are busy. But Korean retail, were not busy at all. Usually afternoon or so is contradicting traffic. So when doctors visit and then retail visit less, when doctors visit stop, the retail visit more. So that's what typical Korean American shopping mall. Of course, there's 30% I'm targeting non-Korean, attracting some national brand, maybe everybody go to restaurant, wherever. So this one I have explained many times. So that kind of traffic, unique, ethnic or Korean American traffic is different. Another one is, I said, spa, third floor. Actually, my concept is not education, more likely general, maybe office is more fair statement to their owner. So probably the parking traffic is very, very, we can compromise this project very well. So I know the typical Korean shopping mall, what's the traffic are there. So I have explained several times. So that's what real picture. And then, yes, and I'm really excited. I can tell you today, actually here, audience, there are all Korean American media here, 3 TV, 4 newspapers. Actually, they are really supporting this project. They're excited. I didn't tell you, actually, Dr. So is my colleague, my respected physician, MD. He's also recently elected as a councilman near city, so he's really trust to this project, so he like to talk to you. I really appreciate it. And then my vision is, yes, this project will make everybody happy, definitely to the Glendale, not just Korean American, non-Korean. I know if somebody happy, everybody can be happy. So Glendale, maybe LA County, not even. I learned a lot from since I came to here. So thanks a lot. Please support a little bit support. I will make a success definitely in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't have any other cards. If my colleagues don't have any questions, I'm going to close the public hearing. Okay, let's go with the questions.
Tom Mitchell?
Mr. Mitchell, come forward, please.
Thank you. I just have a question about the driveway on Los Feliz Boulevard, because I looked at the renderings, and I didn't look at the plan, I looked at the renderings, so it's possible that it was rendered differently than it's actually proposed. But is it possible, because I share the speaker's concern about pedestrians, and we've all had the experience of walking down a street and there being a driveway that you can't cross because there's so many cars going in and out. Is it possible to put a pedestrian-only kind of push-button thing that will give a red light to cars coming in, so that, not triggered by timing or anything like that, but that can be triggered by a pedestrian?
Technically, it certainly can be done. Our observations thus far has been that the pedestrian volume through that area is negligible. We see nothing that's going to change that. We'll certainly take into account as far as the physical design of the driveway. I think the rendering, since it was done by architects, not engineers, you have to take that with a grain of salt. And it's shown as...
Now, there's a challenge, Mr. Mayor. The engineers have thrown down the gauntlet or their protractor.
I didn't say a word.
Or whatever it is they throw down.
Mr. Weaver, I think I read that correctly. I'm not sure.
Slide
But
rules.
so it's something that in the future, if there's an issue,
Most
something
definitely.
that we could add?
Most definitely. And with the design, the drawing does give that indication that it would be probably a high speed. And that's the last thing that we want to accomplish, because once people do make the turn in, they have to stop about 60 feet inside the garage to go through some sort of a gate, a ticket spitter of some sort. It's trying to compromise between to get people safely off Los Feliz. It is high speed. It is a lot of volume. There is a separate right turn lane there, but we don't want to risk people backing out of the right turn lane into the intersection of Gardena and just causing bigger problems at that location. I've discussed this with the city engineer. What we want to avoid, you're probably all familiar with the driveway that's up at the new parking garage, relatively new at Glendale Community College, where you come off through there off Mountain. We don't want to have a duplication of that. That was some problems from drainage, but we've learned a lot of lessons from that particular design. And it is a 90-degree design. It's just a question of how large the radius is through there. And we're comfortable that we can safely accommodate cars, peds, and bicyclists through that location.
And what about pedestrian ingress and egress into the building itself from the street? Do they have to walk across driveways? Do they have to walk across parking, or is there a separate pedestrian entrance from the sidewalk?
Probably other gentlemen could probably respond better, but it seems to be that coming from off-site, the primary pedestrian location is on that corner of Gardena and Los Feliz. So the driveway that we're talking about in Los Feliz is out of the way from that. The other driveway that comes off Fernando Court is at the far end, where no pedestrian would ever be in that area. So there really shouldn't be those conflicts.
Okay. Glad
Do you
to
have
know.
any other, Mr. Quintero? Any other
Maybe
questions?
you can answer the question. In terms of the structure itself, there are some parking structures where you literally have people queuing up because one person is pulling out of a stall. Other parking structures are wide enough, the lanes are wide enough that you can sort of swing around them. Do you have any idea where this structure is in terms of the width of the...
What they've used is what's required in our standard code. It'd be very similar to our parking garage out here. Each aisle is two-way. It's just simple two bays of parking. You've got 90-degree parking on each side. You've got one lane in each direction that separates those. So if you're coming in and there's someone stopped because they see someone up ahead that wants to park, they will stop and they will block the person behind. The only recourse is to drive around that.
It is wide enough to do that.
Oh, yes, most definitely to do that. And as far as the inbound, both of the inbounds will have 2 lanes to handle inbound traffic. The outbound also has 2 lanes that can monitor the traffic that gets out of the garage.
In terms of parking signs, the modern structures now actually tell, well, modern or even at Burbank, Bob Hope Airport, you actually know on the second floor there's 200 available or 50 or whatever it is. Is there any special, anything special that needs to be done to accommodate that type of?
No, it's just in the construction of it. It's obvious an added expense. You're all familiar with it at the Americana right now, and theirs would be very simple with this. The one thing with this, unlike the Americana where you drive through and you can circle and bypass level after level, this garage, you literally drive by every space. If you come in from Los Feliz, you go through the 2 levels of subterranean, then you meet the people who chose to enter from Fernando Court. Then you're in the same bay then, and you just keep following those that are in front of you. So in that case, it doesn't really matter. If you have it and said the 4th floor you have extra parking, you still have to drive through 1, 2, and 3 to get up there anyway.
Mr. Weaver.
Mr. Mitchell, has the internal structure of the parking garage been finalized? In other words, what you're describing, what we see in the architectural renderings, is that the design, how it's going to operate? It'll be more like the Galleria than the Americana.
Correct. Functionally, what is shown in there is what we've done a lot of work with the applicant and his consultants on coming up with a design. It's a very simple design, as I said. It's 2 bays of parking, and everybody drives right. There are no speed ramps. There's nothing that...
Was there any discussion at all about going to an Americana-style?
No, there's
not enough room, wouldn't create enough space.
Well, that's the thing, because it's a very tight site. And we're talking barely 120 feet in the east-west direction and in the north-south to be able to make the turns.
Almost physically impossible.
Well, if you tried to put in the speed ramps, you'd have no room left for the parking. And again, this is a garage with a little under 600 spaces. The Americana, their main garage, is over 2,500 spaces.
I just wanted to get that cleared out.
Yeah, no, it's a good point.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing and open it up for comments.
I'll go ahead and say my thoughts. I used to ride on Los Feliz back in the 1940s, 1950s. That was the main, and it was at grade crossing then. That was the way we'd go over to Hollywood. It's on Los Feliz. And then one day the city got wise with the freight trains stopping on Los Feliz. It would back up traffic tremendously until the freight cars would move. So therefore, the underpass, so they could move more traffic on Los Feliz. And if you cross coming to Glendale from Hollywood, you go over the LA River and you make the bend of the straightaway, and if this building is there, you're going to know where Glendale is because it'll be visible down the line. Good entry point into Glendale. It is an industrial area currently. Personally, I think this will be a catalyst for what will happen in the block from the animal hospital up to San Fernando Road with additional development sometime in the future. This site, I believe, is a very difficult site with all the parameters that have been talked about, the railroad to the west, industrial to the north, 2 sewer lines, storm drain, constraints to the south. It's a hard site to work with. It's the kind of site where you can say, well, let's reject this, it doesn't give us all the parking, whatever, and go on to something else. But that site has sat there vacant for, I don't know, decades. And to me, something like this has got to come in. You've had the environmental document done, which indicates the impacts. And all it's supposed to tell me as a councilman, here are the impacts that can be mitigated for, and here are the ones that can't. I, as a councilman, can vote for overriding conditions saying putting a project like that here is more important than the impacts it will create. We've done the traffic studies. I know that we're talking about parking on site, the employees. I remember we did Glendale Career College, which is in the basement underneath the Goodwill, and we required them to park in the Orange Street garage. We gave them permits. We're monitoring to make sure that all the students are indeed parking there. Mechanism was set up for doing that. And I don't see why we couldn't do the same thing here. It may be a little different, but I think we could. We've tried a long time to bring businesses into Glendale, and we're told constantly, at least I am, that people don't care to do business in Glendale. It's too difficult. Well, in these economic times, if we can get something like this to come in spite of it, we ought to be doing everything we can to make it happen. Is it perfect in every way? No, but it's a constrained site. Passageway between the parking garage, for instance, and building itself, that's where that storm drain is. LA County Flood Control requires that you be able to access that drain, that storm drain, even though it's 30 feet down. It's no different than the Hilton covering the Paducah Wash, because I'm the one that approved that. It's set up, as you notice, there's no buildings over it. The Corps of Engineers or LA County Flood Control ever want to get down there, it's parking lot and trees. They can get down there. That's the same thing that has happened on this site, another very big constraint. So given all the constraints, to be able to come up with something like this, I'm willing to risk the fact it might get crowded. It'd be nice to see it filled up quite often. And I suppose there'll be times, like at Christmas or something, it'll be filled to capacity, just like the Americana, whatever, and there'll be spilled out. I think this is a good gateway project into the city. It does serve a big need of a large group of Koreans that either live in Glendale or close to Glendale. It's going to provide us revenue into the city. So I'm willing to trade all that off against possible things that will happen in the development of it. I do know I'm looking at architectural drawings, not looking at engineering drawings. Mr. Mitchell said when the engineers start designing it internally, it's like you're looking at the skeleton, a person. It's the internal workings. When the engineers design it, they'll find out what really does work inside or not. And they may be back to us again. Mr. Loomis is having a good time laughing on this one. But that's the reality. It hasn't been engineered yet. We're approving it as best we can from architectural drawings. So I've talked too long. I support it. I think it'll be great for Glendale.
Thank you. Mr. Draymond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, one of my concerns actually it's how these things work. It wasn't a concern I had when I sat down. It's a concern that I developed as I was listening to one or more of the speakers. And that relates to the spa use or the gym use, and is there a distinction between the two? And based on that distinction, we're looking at models that are relatively remote to us, which tells me that perhaps there is a distinction in kind of spa or gym use. In any case, the overall benefits of this project that this project brings to the city, for me, are the same as they were. I recognize them as the same as they were when this project came before us the last time. It is From the aesthetic end of it, it is an attractive project design-wise. It will be I think, a very beneficial structure, providing a nicer gateway to our city on Los Feliz. I don't think there's any question about that. And I think some time and energy and interest was placed in making sure that the design reflects that. The largest concern I have relates to parking, to some degree the traffic, but mostly the parking. The conditions that I'm inclined to support this project and approve it, largely for the same reasons Mr. Weaver mentioned, and I assume you're going to hear over and over. Yes. I didn't mean to interrupt you if you were taking a nap.
No, I was listening on TV back there.
This project, I think, will be very successful. It will be successful for the city as well as the developer. The reason for my wanting to support it from that standpoint has nothing to do with whether it will serve a particular ethnic community, because financial success for the developer will mean in this case, will mean financial success for the city and all of its residents. And that color green that spills over across all ethnic and cultural divides. Successful business is successful business. It's good for everybody, and I would like to see that here in our city. But to the extent that it fills a need we have here that currently isn't being filled, so much the better. The conditions that I'm interested in seeing placed on this, one, of course, relates to something that Mr. Loomis mentioned, the other conditions that staff would likely follow through on, having to do with materials and some of those things. I want to make sure that wasn't lost in this discussion. So those concerns that Mr. Loomis expressed, I'd like to see as a condition on this project. Then, with regard to the parking, the employee parking, I think I would like to see the condition that this be free employee parking. I think by doing that, we will fairly well guarantee, at least while the market is the main draw here, that the customers will be parking on site. Know that's going to happen simply because of the nature of the use. They're going to want to park on site. The employee parking should be free so that the employees aren't incentivized to go out in the neighborhood. And hand in hand with that, I believe that Mr. Weaver has a good answer for the assurance that the employees are parking on site, which is this kind of permit program that we've used elsewhere, particularly with the what used to be the Career College. I'm
Glendale.
not sure what
It's still the same name, Glendale Career College.
Glendale Career College on brand. I think that's a very good way to do this, and I think we do have to monitor that. I also just want to make sure that the developer understands that if they are not able to identify a tenant for this spa component, and that change of use ends up being a more intensive use of parking, shall we say, that this is not going to be a slam dunk if that happens, that there are going to be other issues involved, and just any use of that space will not do. The reason, as Mr. Weaver points out, it is a very constrained site. But there is no question, having driven through that area often, this is going to be a huge improvement physically to that site, aesthetically to that part of the city. It's going to be a huge improvement in terms of revenues, sales, retail, spin-off benefits of real estate, and so on. This is going to be good for the city. So I encourage you to find that tenant soon, and I wish you luck with the project. I'm going to support this, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, may I add just one statement I had written down I didn't cover? It wasn't in the documents, but when it talked about not having an entrance at Medina and Fernando Court, One thing they didn't put in there, and I thought should have been, safety. Putting an entrance at that location in the night is not near as safe as having the entrance at San Fernando, at Los Feliz Gardena. Much safer. It'll be more well lit, more visible. So I think for safety reasons, the way it's laid out now is much better. Thank you.
I am very supportive of the project. I'm very happy that Dr. Cho has chosen to move forward, since we all know how difficult all manner of construction is, from financing to... So it's going to be very positive for the area, and it will bring a transformation not just to that immediate neighborhood, but hopefully it will extend on to San Fernando Road, Los Feliz, and all of the surrounding businesses. It's near the freeway, so there's going to be quite a bit of usage from people coming off to 5 that will use the services, and then perhaps get back on Los Feliz and go up the 5. And I do envision that in addition to the Korean American community, there's going to be a lot of non-Korean Americans that are going to be using these facilities. I had the opportunity to go to Seoul, Incheon, Busan, and this type of shopping mall, if you want to call it that, is very entertaining, and it's a great shopping experience. So I think it's going to kind of put Glendale on the map. I would personally prefer a spa. I think we're going to be much more successful with that. There's so many educational businesses in Glendale that be up to the developer to decide, but I do think a spa would be a much better usage. Now, in terms of the parking issues, I mean, we have to nail down these issues, because we not only don't want to impact the existing businesses in this neighborhood, but future development. I mean, this is going to be a catalyst. Other people will be buying properties and wanting to perhaps be a satellite of whatever is going on here, and we don't want to put in motion a situation where we wind up having these issues. Fortunately, it's near the transportation center, so over time perhaps there'll be some visitors and even employees that could use the Glendale's transportation center, where we have the MTA and bus lines, et cetera. But we have to make sure that whatever we do in terms of parking doesn't impact the surrounding area. And absolutely, the employees have to park free. It needs to be written into the agreement, and however it's done through leases for the tenants, but we absolutely have to have free employee parking. Otherwise, the surrounding neighborhoods are going to be impacted. But anyway, I'm very supportive. It's a beautiful building. I love the way it addresses Los Feliz with the landscaping and the plaza. It's just a beautiful, beautiful design, and I'm looking forward to that opening real soon.
First, let me ask, and you guys can just nod or shake your head, will there be Korean restaurants here? Yes? Okay, you've got my vote. No, I'm kidding. I'm half kidding. I agree with everything that's been said, so I'm not going to go into, belabor any of that, but I agree with the conditions, with, the conditions that my colleagues have suggested, the conditions that the staff have suggested. I appreciate the developer taking the comments that were given in the last design review to heart and working with staff so well to come up with solutions for the issues that were identified. That doesn't always happen, and it's great to see a developer that really works with us to come up with a better project. I also had the opportunity to visit Korea recently, and I did see shopping centers like this in Korea, and there are also some in Koreatown, obviously. And it's a new concept for Glendale, but it's something that I think will be of interest to all of the residents of Glendale, a place where you can go and maybe bring your kids in to get tutored, maybe not, but you can go, you can shop for food, you can go to the spa, you can go to your doctor's office, you can really get all of the errands that you need done in a day, done in one location. And that's really the appeal of this. I do like the design. I am sorry that the automated parking solution wasn't looked into. I don't know that much about it, but if the hype is true and the presentations are true that I saw, it would be a way of parking a lot more cars on this site economically, something that would save money for the project over time, that would probably lead to a nicer design, but certainly give you more parking spaces, which if you're successful, you may end up needing. So I would request that, assuming that the ship hasn't sailed and that it's not too late, that the developers sit down with any one of the many companies that are offering this automated parking to look into it, because it might be something that would save you money and give you a lot more parking spaces, which would make this council, I'm sure as a whole, feel a lot more comfortable. So if you would be willing to do that, we can help set that up. But I do support the project. I have the same concerns over parking and traffic, but I think that the benefits that this brings will outweigh that. And I think it will help to really reinvigorate that neighborhood and the housing that's around there, the transportation center, everything that we're trying to do in the south part of the city. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'll be brief also. Much of my comments were covered by my colleagues. I do support this project. It is a dynamic and energetic design that will revitalize that corner of Los Feliz that is really dead and dilapidated at the moment. I do support all the changes or modifications, amendments, if you will, to the parking issues involving the free parking for the employees, as well as the other suggestions that were made by my colleagues. I would like to see a spa there. I think that would bring a very unique use to the building that would bring us something that we really don't have in Glendale. But I understand there's economics involved behind that. Very happy to have this development here, especially by members of the Korean American community. And hopefully it will lead to much more development of the same style and dynamism. May we get a clarity on are we clear on the amendments and the direction that we...
As we go through these, talk to her, I'll know when to step in for the amendments.
Okay.
And then it'll include the staff, the recommended staff conditions as well.
They'll come in.
Let's start, Mr. Weaver.
But I know we can start with 1A for the agency. That's the environmental document.
I'll second that for the agency.
Okay, roll call.
Agency members Draymond?
Yes.
Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Chair Friedman?
Yes.
And I'll move 1B for the council on the EIR.
Second.
Roll call for council.
Council members Draymond?
Yes.
Friedman?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Mayor Najarian?
Yes.
Now, for the agency motion at 1C, are we now making, here's the first.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, members of the agency, we are adding two conditions specifically to the Stage 2 motion at 1C. We will be adding condition number 3, which will state, project employees shall be required to park at the on-site parking structure and shall not be charged a fee or charge for parking in the parking structure. The applicant owner shall establish a permit program or similar mechanism to monitor employee parking to ensure that employees do not park on neighborhood streets. The program or mechanism shall be subject to the review and approval of the Director of Community Planning and/or of Traffic and Transportation. There's condition number 4 to the same Stage 2 motion. The applicant/owner shall explore the feasibility of implementing an automated parking program within the parking structure, if that's to the liking of the agency and the City Council. And then condition number 5, applicant/owner shall implement the design review suggestions set forth by the city's principal urban designer at the December 14th, 2010 joint meeting of the City Council and the Redevelopment Agency.
That's my motion at 1C as amended.
Second.
For the agency.
For the agency.
Roll call.
Agency members Draymond?
Yes.
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Chair Friedman?
Yes.
Now, on 1D, there is a change. The motion says 425 Los Feliz, it's 435.
Second.
That change.
That amendment, I'll second. With that correction, I will second.
Okay, can we have a roll call?
Agency members Draymond,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Chair Friedman.
Yes.
And now 1E for the agency with
Chili. Or Mike.
Oh, you're,
I apologize.
So all of those conditions related to parking.
All of those that
Item
were
1C.
applying to parking would apply to.
and that's my motion.
Second.
Okay, roll call?
Agency members Draymond,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Chair Friedman.
Yes.
I move 1F for the council.
Second?
Oh, wait. I can move 1F, G, H, and I in one motion.
Okay, second?
Roll call, please.
Council members Draymond,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Congratulations. I'll move to adjourn for the agency.
Second.
Move to adjourn for the council.